Hello everyone, and welcome. We just had a few technical problems that I'm just trying to sort out, but we are there and we are with you. So, okay. Welcome to everybody and welcome to our hosty MEPs to this European Parliament Intergroup Climate Change, Biodiversity and Sustainable Development event on the EU Green Deal ambitions. What do we want and need from EU forests? My name is Jo O'Hara. I'm a forestry professional, a consultant, and I was formerly Scotland's Chief Forestry Advisor. I'm very pleased today to introduce the co-hosts of this event, who are the co-chairs of Intergroup's Sustainable Forest Management Working Group, MEPs Elsi Katainen and Simone Schmiedtbauer, and also MEP Carmen Avram. Welcome. I also would like to welcome all of you. We have special guests from the Commission and the Parliament and ministers, as well as obviously a number of other people there. I see we have over 100 people who are now in the attendance box. Brief agenda for today is that we will have opening remarks from our hosts. Then we will have two sessions involving a presentation followed by a panel discussion. And at the end of those two sessions, we'll have an audience Q&A and finally some closing remarks from co-host MEP Carmen Avram. A couple of technical points is that the Twitter hashtags are on the agenda that you've been sent. Please feel free to use those and follow the EP Intergroup account, which is at EP Intergroup_SD. This event is being recorded. And the recordings and PowerPoint will be available on the website of the event tomorrow. As far as questions from the audience go, we would invite you to send us questions during the event. Please use the Q&A box on the right of your screen. When you do that, please also use the all panelists option for your question. And make sure to start your question with the name of the panelist to whom it is directed. These questions will all be collated. We'll select some of them for the final Q&A session at the end. So that is all the technical advice. So we can now get things on the road. And I would like to introduce some welcoming remarks from our co-hosts. And first of all, I would like to welcome MEP Elsi Katainen to the stage to start to open the event. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo, dear participants. Good afternoon and thank you for joining us today. I'm happy to host this webinar together with my two colleagues, Simone and Carmen. I can say that today's topic is very timely as we are waiting for the Commission's proposal on Fit for 55 package as well as the new EU forest strategy. We have a big task ahead of us. The good thing is that we all agree that forests are extremely important to the objective of the Green Deal. However, problems arise if we don't look at the big picture, but try to maximize forests' contribution to just one or two objectives. We need to take a holistic approach. EU forest strategy is the instrument which should guarantee the holistic approach. EU has competence on many sectors and those sectoral policies affect forests as well. While EU has no competence on forest policy, the Union needs a coherent, strong and effective forest strategy that creates a framework that guarantees that forests are addressed in a coherent manner. In addition to making sure that various sectoral policies make sense from the forestry point of view, the strategy should promote the forest sector and all the related value chains. EU has nothing to gain by trying to regulate forestry policy in member states. Instead, it should concentrate to make sure that the Green Deal policies are coherent and balanced when it comes to forests. A misstep was already taken in the Green Deal communication when describing the forest strategy with a very narrow focus. Another misstep was made by waiting until July this year before publishing the strategy. Now it is high time to honor Parliament's and the Council's request for a balanced and strong strategy, which also respects national competence on forest policy. We have also seen a leaked version of EU forest strategy, and I wish that Commission will correct it in a way that the member state competence on forest policy, forest management plans, and setting the forestry-related definitions is respected, and that Commission sees the multifunctional role of forest as a benefit for climate, economy, and environment. I see that the member states have the best knowledge of their forests. In Finland, we have 100 years experience on forest monitoring. Also, what comes to ownership, Finland is a country of 5 million people, and we have 600,000 forest owners. And in addition, the forest sector provides a wide range of services, well-being, and jobs for society as a whole. And forest products are a significant part of our exports. But without longer speech, I'd like to give the floor to my colleague Simone. I wish you all a good and fruitful discussion later on. Thank you so much.
It's my turn. Good afternoon to you all. Dear Chair, dear speakers, dear colleagues, I'm very delighted to open today's intergroup event together with my Finnish colleague Elsi. Hello Elsi, nice to see you on this way. I find our topic today of utmost importance for the future of Europe, and very much at pace with the challenges we face in the times we live. And I find it significant that we discuss this question today with the decision makers from the member states, European institutions and forestry scientists and researchers to find a common ground on how Europe's forests can help to accomplish the multiple ambitions of the European Green Deal. Some of you may know that I'm from Styria in Austria, also called the Green Heart of Austria. This has a very simple reason, because more than 60% of the surface of Styria is covered by forest, and a total of 48% of Austria's surface is covered by forests. I'm a forest owner myself, so forests have always been very important to me. So I'm a practitioner. I work with the land that past generations handed over to us, and that we will hand over to our future generations. So forestry is generational thinking, nothing less than that. So it's my pleasure to speak to you as a co-chair of the working group and to play a role raising and gathering the voices of stakeholders which are directly involved in the rural world, land and forest management, food supply chain, and also biodiversity conversation at European level. It has been a long time, truly, that the Parliament has waited for the Commission to step up regarding the new EU forest strategy. It is crucial for the future of forest owners and managers to understand how the Commission is moving forward in defining the different actions of the strategy in the light of the Green Deal. Now I want to take the opportunity to share my personal point of view on the matter with you all. As such, I have to say, it is with great concern that I note that the draft EU forest strategy to be presented by the Commission mid-July, so now before us, is not only unbalanced, but also endangers family forestry in Europe, undermines the principle of subsidiarity in Europe, criticizes sustainable forest management lived in practice for generations, and also downgrades the importance of fossil substitution by forest-based products. The transition to a sustainable bioeconomy is at risk to become compromised. And I honestly do not understand the Commission's reasoning behind all that, especially after hearing the voice of the Parliament with its own initiative report on the EU forest strategy and also the Council conclusions. Our forests have various missions to fulfill. We all know that. it is very important to stress that ecological, economic and social output and sustainability go hand in hand and are not contradicting. We just need to tie the ends. Sustainable forest management that feeds a multifunctionality of forests is a European strength, not a weakness. And it must remain the heart of the new EU forest strategy. If we take the EU Green Deal seriously, if we truly want to become climate neutral by 2050, we cannot allow further fossil CO2 to pollute our atmosphere. Factually, fossil times must come to an end at last. Wood is among the most important raw materials we have in the EU, and we need to use it sustainably but actively. Without, for example, biomass, a real transition to a greener Europe isn't possible. So overall, forest owners are willing to play an active part in the future Green Deal for Europe. Their first concern, however, is to restore degraded forest stands caused by climate change and to improve the resilience of the forest's ecosystems. And we need to let them do that, please. Forest owners such as myself are part of the solution to protect the climate. We have knowledge and ability to work on sustainable solutions in the field of forestry and environmental protection. And we need to start to see it as a whole, not in different ways. So I feel that it is our duty to use the EU's great potential to tackle the environmental and societal challenges we face today, such as mitigating climate change, boosting sustainability and resource efficiency, while parallel that maintaining European competitiveness and job creation. The European Green Deal delivers answers and solutions to these challenges. And I believe it has to do so with an open mind and pragmatic will, and please, free of ideology. So for these reasons, it is really a good time to take place at the right moment, asking the right questions, and I'm very interested in your answers. So I'm very much looking forward to hear today's speakers and wish all of us an interesting event and a very fruitful discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you both very much for that welcome. So as we heard from both of our co-chairs, forestry can impact on so many things. What we need to do. I'm sorry, I've got a technical problem. So forestry can impact on so many things. Trying to cover them all is quite complex. So what we've done today is divided into two panels. The first one looking at forests for green growth and social cohesion, and the second looking at forestry for the climate and biodiversity and nature. So we're going to kick off now with the first panel, and I would like to introduce Mr. Hausmann, Thomas Hausmann, who is the head of the liaison unit of Forest Europe from Bonn. And I'd like to invite you, Mr. Hausmann, to give us the opening speech for this first panel on forests for green growth and social cohesion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Joe, and thanks also for inviting me to the organizers. It's a pleasure and honor for me to give a very short keynote. And maybe the organizers could share the PowerPoint presentation. Here we are. Thank you. So maybe the next slide already. So in the invitation, you found a very easy and simple question. What do we want and need from EU forest? And to be honest, it seems to be a simple question, but it's extremely complicated to answer. It's a complex answer. And I just give you 4 examples while it's so complicated and maybe even impossible to answer it from the perspective of the European Union. First of all, you have so many different forest owners. We have just heard from Mrs. Schmiedtbauer that she is a private forest owner. Maybe it's a family-owned forest for generations, and for sure you might have other interests and objectives than a private forest owner which bought forest for hunting purposes only. And then, of course, you have the public forest, maybe with, again, different interests and objectives. You have social interests which are different from rural and urban areas. This has been documented by several studies. Just give me one example. Take a standing dead tree in the forest. Maybe some forest owners in the rural area regard this dead standing tree as a firewood, while in the city forest, many citizens might just see the habitat for endangered species here. We need, of course, to respect that there are so many people depending on jobs along the whole forest value chain, with new jobs in the field of bioeconomy. And if it's possible after the COVID crisis to travel again, you will of course recognize that the forest ecosystem from Mrs. Katainen in Finland, in Austria with the mountains down to the south are so different. And all these few examples would give me the personal opinion that there is no solution that fits all. We need to respect the local conditions, and therefore I'm very hesitant to favor a top-down approach with regulating the management all over Europe. Next slide, please. But that does not mean, of course, that we do not need a policy framework. We need a policy framework, and just recognize that also our continent needs to fulfill the agenda for the Sustainable Development Goals with the SDGs. And we do not only have to respect this in our own forest, but we are also responsible for forest in the other parts of the world. Just to give you two examples, I would like to cite the WWF report that Europe is, with its consumption, and just to mention here the meat consumption, responsible for loss of tropical forest. And also, if you discuss to have a large area of set-aside in the European forest, you will have to discuss about the leakage effect. I would like to cite Mr. Dieter from the National Forest Research Institute, and we need to discuss whether we would like to import then the roundwood, which is needed also to fill, for example, the Bauhaus initiative of the Commission. So just two short examples, and for me the solution that has been mentioned by the members of parliament already is the concept of sustainable forest management. Because this includes, and it's often forgotten, that it's not only about sustainable use, it's also about strict protection of hotspots, and it really tries to balance the different interests. And the second point, which is very important for me, is the involvement of stakeholders. And it's of course not only the members of parliament or the representative of the governments, it's the forest owners, but also other target groups. I will come back to this. Next slide, please. You might ask what Forest Europe can contribute to this debate. It's a process at the ministerial level already 30 years. And we believe that we are the custodian of this sustainable forest management concept. So I will not bother you now with the definitions and with the 6 criteria and the 47 indicators. But if you have a look in the details, there are quite a balanced approach. And depending on the local conditions, we believe that this is a dynamic concept which is still valid. And the second point is, with the 46 signatories, so to the east, to Turkey, to Ukraine, to Russia, and the many observer organizations, you have a platform to debate in an informal way for example, the question how to best and sustainable manage our forest. Next slide, please. What is maybe interesting for you is to see a few of these visions which we have just recently agreed upon. So the sustainable management I've already mentioned. The focus, public and private forest owner, is for us very important because they are on the spot, the experts, but they are also, of course, dependent on the public opinion, and therefore the importance of the stakeholder involvement, be it environmental NGOs, be it interest group on the spot, is so important. And the last point I would like to mention is the issue of forest research, but I will come back with this in a minute. Next slide, please. Could you show us the next slide, please? Thank you. I would like to cite here Mr. Kurt Bollmann from Switzerland. He argued that you should strictly protect your biological heritage in your forest. And I'm sure that, for example, you, Mrs. Schmiedtbauer, are doing exactly this. And in all the forests, we have these heritages. But beside this, we should also manage our forests in the way that there are as many different structures. And from this small puzzle, you might see that you will have, of course, old growth parts. You will have rare forest types. And my understanding that already now many forest managers are respecting in their management these different habitats, habitat trees, for example. Therefore, I would put a question mark on a let's say, oval set aside percentage over all the European forest. I would more go to the local level and look at the site, what to protect in the best manner. And by the way, I would like to mention that this slide is from the European Network Integrate, which I believe is a very good example. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here you see what I promised already with the sound research, because I believe this is really important, and this is also a plea to the members of the Parliament and to the Commission to provide resources for a boundary and research. The opinion is that complex challenges, and it's not only climate change, it's also loss of diversity in some areas. It really requires coordinated action, and that means not only in the small forest world, but also cross-sector. The second point, which is for me, is that you as a member of Parliament are following this. Your decisions are science-based. It's, of course, important also in COVID times to think about ways of science policy work, and my plea is also that there is demand for updated comparable data. So here I think national forest inventories are the backbone, but there are new techniques that are testing the course or some think about data sources, for example, in the field of biodiversity. And just mention that our report, the state of the European forest, is published. And if you just show us the next slide, a joint work by the FAO and also the UNC. The next slide, is possible? Show, please. Yes, this was just a glance cover. So already the concept of management, not the concept which has to be fit for the future. This is for me satisfying interest, and it's a major contribution to the economy. I already mentioned that there should be new modes for most policy actions. Policy needs this and finally, Europe is a good form for the dialogue between signatories and stakeholders, and of course it offers also the opportunity to get in contact with our colleagues outside the European Union, some part of our continent. And last slide, thank you for listening of the channels, and I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Houseman. We did have a few problems with your connection there, so maybe Vera can do some tweaking while we head on to the panel. Okay, thanks very much for that introduction to Forest Europe and introduction to the challenge that we're facing. So I'd now like to invite all the members of panel 1 to switch on your cameras, and I will introduce you. And perhaps as I say your name, you could just give a small wave to the audience. So first of all, may I introduce Nuno Banza, who's president of the Institute for Nature Conservation and Forests from the Ministry of Agriculture in Portugal. Then I'd like to introduce Mr. David Kamovitz, who's the manager of the Forestry Division from the Food and Agriculture Association or Organization, FAO, of the United Nations. Next, we have MEP Emma Wiesner, who's joining us as well. Hi, Emma. And Mr. Houseman is going to join us on this panel as well. Okay, so thank you for that. So what I would like to do first of all, just to get things going, is to have a quick fire round, which is with an opening question for you to give us a 2-minute answer on. So the question I would like to ask each of you is, in your opinion, what are the 2 most important things, just 2, that must be achieved through the Green Deal to ensure that Europe's forests deliver green growth and improve social cohesion? So 2 things. Who would like to go first? If you put your hands up and unmute yourself, then you can go first. Who would like to go first? I'm going to name somebody.
I can go.
Okay, yes, great. Thank you, Mr. Banza.
There's always someone to be the first. So, well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure. Just a short remark. The Nature Conservation Forest Institute for Portugal, it's integrated in the Environmental and Climate Action Ministry, and not in agriculture, but it's just a hint. It's just a short remark. And to try to answer your question, I would like us, well, as already mentioned today, the EU Green Deal is an instrument that covers a set of initiatives of the greatest relevance for forests. In terms of its main objective, the development of truly transformative policies and the integration of sustainability into the all EU policies. These are the 2 areas that are fundamental for the forest sector. The forestry sector and forests are nature-based solutions, and which we could call a win-win solution. And the benefits that forests bring in all dimensions of sustainability make them a unique sector to deliver on the Green Deal objectives. However, in the design and implementation of the initiatives in the Green Deal Action Plan, there are some basic aspects that, in our view, should be considered. Well, therefore, I would say that it's essential that policies and measures emanating from the Green Deal take an integrated approach of forest and of the forest sector. The set of initiatives is vast. Sometimes it's difficult for us to follow all the developments and the elements that are being proposed and approved under the umbrella of the Green Deal Action Plan. In addition, there's a part of different EU policies with different objectives. So it's critical to have a consistent and coherent framework with regards to forests, and in order to not to have conflict messages. In particular, any instrument or measure must consider forests and the forest sector in their multiple aspects in a balanced way, environmental, social, and economic, and must take into account concepts and commitments on criteria to enhance sustainable forest management that EU member states have been building together, including in the context of the Forest Europe and of the United Nations Forum on Forests. A second main point is that the diversity of forests and of the sector across the EU must be recognized in the design of the instruments and measures under the Green Deal, as there is not one single or identical solution for all. We have to bear in mind that characteristics of forests and the forest sector may vary considerably among member states. As we all know, in some EU member states, forests are mostly publicly owned, while in others they are privately owned. Forests vary due to climatic, geographical, and physiographic conditions from north to south and from east to west, from the sea level to higher altitudes. So they also have different features after millenniums of human intervention, and historic, economical, and social conditions have shaped them differently. In our view, we need to have a flexible approach that recognizes the diversity in the sector, leaving member states autonomy to define some national forestry policies in compliance with the principle of subsidiarity, as this is the only way to increase social cohesion and deliver green growth. Well, to end, indeed, the scope of the Green Deal, we should obviously highlight the role of the EU biodiversity strategy post-2020 as an instrument foreseeing a set of measures of the greatest relevance and potential impact on forests and forest sector, as well as the climate package, through only a holistic way. Yeah, we need to have a strong economic basis for the sector's development. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, sorry for cutting you off. I just need to make sure that we get through everybody.
Okay,
great. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Kamovitz, you're next on my screen. Would you like to go next, please?
Thank you, and thank you so much for the honor and the possibility to address you all today. I think the first thing that really is going to be important with the New Deal is that investments that are used for short-term purposes of economic recovery and job creation, we make sure that they actually are building long-term social, human, and natural capital. Our experience at FAO globally is that the quality and sustainability of economic recovery in the context of COVID and in other situations is integrally linked to how resilient the communities are. In particular, how strong their farmer and family forestry organizations and cooperatives are, their community institutions, their local information systems. How strong is the skills base in areas such as organizing, marketing, accessing public services, and business incubation? And how are they doing in terms of having more diverse ecosystems and getting more trees and more carbon into their landscapes? Some of the best ways we can deliver green growth and support social cohesion are precisely to invest in local grassroots organizations, skills development, and building up natural assets, and those have to be essential elements of any sort of long-term endeavor like this. And in that context, we shouldn't forget the trees on farms, which are an important part of the overall picture, and sometimes are included in forests and sometimes are not. The second point, and I was very happy to hear Thomas talking about this, is that we have to make sure that EU activities outside Europe reinforce the forestry efforts within the community itself. Because going forward, if we think about it, one of the biggest challenges for European forests is precisely global climate change. And one of the biggest challenges for Europe, as it is for the other regions, is how do we avoid future pandemics from zoonotic diseases like the ones we're witnessing right now with COVID. So given that, even if we're narrowly concerned just with Europe's forest itself, it's important to see Europe's efforts to reduce global deforestation and forest degradation, as essential components of the effort to protect the continent's own forests. Similarly, it's important to think about the efforts to avoid future pandemics by addressing zoonotic diseases linked to land use change and wildlife trade, also as being part of the efforts of safeguarding Europe's own forests. What we've seen so far is definitely moving in the right direction, but there's a clear need for stronger harmonization between the trade and development policies, the biomass and biofuel policies, the anti-corruption and financial crimes initiatives, all of the different elements that together make up the European Union's international presence in international forestry activities. This is especially relevant in this context, given that national forest policies, as our other speakers have mentioned, are not an EU competency, but these global activities clearly are. Thank you very much. And once again, thanks for the opportunity to be here today.
Great, thank you very much for that, David. Ms. Wiesner, may I come to you now, please?
Yes, absolutely. So the two most important things in the Green Deal. Well, first of all, it's not only the Green Deal that is putting a lot of political pressure and tension on the forests right now. There's a lot of initiatives when it comes on the political level and the EU level on forests. We have the forest strategy up and coming. We have the Green Deal, the biodiversity strategy, the new legislation proposal on deforestation. We have the whole Fit for 55 package with the revision of the Renewable Energy Directive, LULUCF. There's a lot of policies right now that are affecting forests, forestry, and forest owners in many ways. And I think it's important, as Mr. Kaminovic, is that your name? I think so. What you said, that the national competence and where EU competence goes, I think that's first of all important to always have in mind and reflect upon when talking about these issues. But narrowing it down then to my two most important things, my expectations, both on Green Deal, but also the other revisions ongoing right now, is first to really have forest owners in the center, to really have a forest owner-centric model speaking about forest and forestry. In Sweden, for example, we have 330,000 forest owners. It's not one forest. Even though we have 70% of the Swedish land being covered in forest, it's not one forest. So there are many forest owners, forests that have been they've been actively managed for generations, planted and replanted, harvested, and also used for economic activities, but have been ongoing for years. And the forest owners simply cannot be forgotten, talking about the upcoming regulatory packages that we talk about today. And the second, I think, is also what Mr. Banza mentioned in his intervention, and it is the differences. There are huge different conditions. It differs so much in different parts of Europe. And I think that is also one reason why we said that forestry is not an EU competence from the beginning. This is really a policy area where conditions differs immensely between different areas of the EU. And we have biodiversity laws in some forests. We see biodiversity recovery in others. We see good practices, we see bad practices, but this differs widely. And what is sustainable forest management in one part of the EU can be completely unsustainable if it's done in another part of the EU. So to have one EU framework, I think, is really, really difficult and also dangerous, to be honest. I think we really need to have the differences in mind and develop a policy framework that takes that into consideration, because forests are a very important resource. Myself, I'm an energy engineer. I see an energy system in Europe with 70% and more of fossil energy. We need to replace and reduce the use of fossil energy, but also fossil products. We see plastics, textiles, a lot of products that needs to be replaced, steel, concrete. We need to use timber. We need to use bioplastic. We need to use biofuels for aviation, for example, where we can. So forest is also an immense and fantastic resource that we can use to achieve the targets of the Green Deal. So maybe those three then will be my the owner's perspective, the differences and variation of forestry across Europe, but also the immense possibilities that forest gives us when it comes to replace fossil products with bio-based ones.
Thank you. You bent the rules and got a third one in. Okay, great. So Thomas, how would you answer that question about what are the two most important things? And if you can keep it as brief as you can, otherwise we're going to struggle for time.
Brief. So we reiterate the need for and I agree with Mrs. Wiesner to put the forest owners in the center, as I've mentioned before, but not.
I'm
the forest owners.
We've lost your connection.
Communication is also part.
Okay, I think we're going to have to move straight on. I'm very sorry about that. If you can do anything to improve your connection. No, maybe if you turn your video off and just speak without your video, see if that will work.
So I come back later. Okay, you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah, it's not good enough. I think what we'll do is we'll wait and I'll try you again in the panel. We'll maybe just skip this question for you and see if you can sort out the connection.
Come back later.
Thank you.
Please continue.
Okay, thanks all, sorry for that. So what we're going to do now is to move into the follow-up questions. Mr. Banza, I'm going to start with you again. So try and answer this in 2 minutes if you can, so we can get through everybody. So as Portugal concludes her presidency, how do you see the future role and competence of EU member states in ensuring that Europe's forests deliver green growth and social cohesion?
Thank you for that question. It looks like a simple question, but in fact it's not. Well, shortly, we believe that the responsibility for forests lies with the member states. I recall that the Council in several occasions reinforced the need to respect the principle of subsidiarity when it comes to forests, namely in the Council conclusions on perspectives for the EU forest-related policies and EU forest strategy post-2020 approved last November under the German presidency. Therefore, it's mostly at national level that we should reconcile economic development and the contribution for the forest sector to the green economy and to the bioeconomy. And the objectives of biodiversity are for climate change adaptation and mitigation, and bring together the respective goals under the umbrella of an encompassive EU forest strategy. We look forward to the future EU forest strategy post-2020 that will be presented shortly, as this is the critical instrument to provide far-reaching, coherent and consistency to the EU perspective to forests. Having said that, when developing national forest policies and instruments, of course, member states will seek to implement agreed EU policies and instruments that contribute to our common goals. A green growth and social cohesion are guiding objectives that in our national forestry policies will also be considered. So I think that's the way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to move to you, Mr. Kamovich. So just introducing the FAO, you bring as an organisation extensive, well-regarded and long-standing global expertise and understanding of forests and their management. We're currently hearing a range of contrasting opinions on the condition and future potential of Europe's forests. What's FAO's perspective on the condition and future potential of EU forests relative to the global situation?
Thanks for the nice comments about FAO. I think this is a question of, do we see the glass as half full or half empty to some extent, not do we disagree so much on the actual situation. If we compare it to the global situation, there's no doubt that Europe's forests are doing better than most other regions. Forest cover has been growing slightly, although that growth is very limited these days. Forest carbon has been growing, although there's some recent research that suggests that that may be starting to reverse or may not. We feel it's too early to say whether really we're in a situation where forest carbon has stopped growing. Biodiversity, there are definitely clearly some species that are endangered, and it's an overall concern. Perhaps the greatest concern that I would have, or that we would have going forward in the medium term, and particularly for the drier parts of Europe, is global climate change. What is increasing drought? What does increasing forest fires? What do increasing pests and diseases mean for Europe and Europe's forests, and how do we address that? I think to date, the effects have been relatively moderate, but there's good reason to believe that they won't be so moderate in the future. And it is a cause for concern for us and certainly for others. In terms of some of the things that I've heard today related to this, I would just say that, you know, for people who want to know where FAO stands, for us, it is very important family foresters and small-scale private owners, small-scale forestry and cooperatives as part of a healthy forest situation. Our global experience is that that's essential for building healthy forests, not simply leaving most of the forest untouched, but leaving most of the forest actively managed by communities and small producers and companies in multiple different ways. And we also share the view that in many cases, wood is a more sustainable option than the alternatives. It's much better to build, in most cases, a building from wood than from cement, or and in many cases, it was pointed out by the previous speaker, it's better to substitute plastics with forest products. So we are not by any means negative towards the use of forest products as a sustainable source of growth and production for all of the regions of the world. But we do think that in Europe, like in the other regions of the world, there are still significant areas for improvement in forest management and no room for complacency. Thank you.
Thank you. Always. I love that point. Always room for improvement. Never room for complacency in forestry. Yeah, couldn't agree more. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to come to you now, Ms. Wiesner. So given Sweden's strong forestry cultures and traditions, could you share some reflections on the contribution of forestry and forest use to building, in particular, greater social cohesion in your country? How can your Nordic experience improve the overall understanding of members of the European Parliament on the role of sustainable forest management and multifunctional forests in social cohesion to ensure balanced forest-related policy making in the EU? So two parts to that question, so I realise it's rather long. First is what can you share with us from Sweden's experience on forests and social cohesion, and how can that experience be translated into the European Parliament? Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Forestry is very close to my heart, so I think I will manage both of your questions. I mean, as I said, 330,000 forest owners we have in Sweden. So both small-scale forest owner, we have state-owned forest, and then we have large-scale forest owners, of course. But they're scattered all over Sweden, just like the jigsaw puzzle that we saw on the slide that Thomas shared. This is also what Sweden looks like. It's a jigsaw puzzle with forest owners spread all across the country. It's not only North Sweden, it's South Sweden, it's Mid Sweden. So forest owners are very well integrated into society. Many have also other work and occupations on the side. Many are family owned. Many have been passed on for generation, where the forests have been going for over 2 to 3 generations. It really connects people and generations across Sweden. And therefore, it is a vital, critical issue, what happens to the forest, how we regulate forestry. And I often hear a lot about the environmental movement, and people want change when it comes to climate change, me includingly. But then you often talk about European people. But I haven't seen the same discussion when it comes to forest owners. I mean, over 300,000 forest owners. That's a lot of people that are invested and really matter and care about the forest and forestry. And that's also a big part of the population in Europe. And that's only in Sweden that I talked about. And I mean, if I want the hard facts and the number, it's 10 to 12% of Sweden's economy and industrial value that is from forestry. So indeed, it has a suicidal impact, both economically and socially across sectors. So what I think then that we in Sweden and Swedish forest owners needs to be better at is telling this story and give this story, because they will be central in the upcoming revision of all of these policy frameworks. And whether they like it or not, forests will be regulated in some way. So they really need to be center of the story and also tell the good things that they're doing. I mean, over 30% of the Swedish forests are protected in one way or another by most oftenly voluntary measures. These are forest owners taking care of their forests, want to do good and want to leave the forest in a better shape than when they found it. We see that the forest in Sweden, even though we are using a lot of forest product these days to substitute fossil-based products like plastics, we still see how the Swedish forest grows. So Sweden have never had as much forest as we have had in the previous 100 years. We have more forest now than 100 years ago, even though we use more and more wood products. That's a good story to tell. For one tree being cutting down, at least 3 new trees are planted, and that makes the forest keep growing. So that is a sustainable forest management where we can use more wood products, but still also increase the carbon sink, because growing trees are absorbing more carbon. But also we have a larger carbon sink of the forest and a larger stock of forest. And I know that in the next panel, they will also talk a lot about biodiversity. So let me just mention upon that as well. 40 years ago, the Swedish state changed forest practices and started regulating and really shaped up the forest management practices. So what we see now, that the biodiversity is actually increasing and getting better and better. But biodiversity takes time. But in the past 30 to 40 years, we actually see good results when it comes to biodiversity, less monoculture and better managed forest. This is a good example and a good practice that we should tell, because I think when I listen to the Commission, I often feel that their story is black and white. Biodiversity is getting terrible and forests are in really bad shape. Well, I can't argue against that some forests are in bad shape and some forests have a lack of biodiversity, but that's not the case everywhere in Europe. And I think the Swedish forest owners and the Swedish good practices of sustainable forest management, that story also needs to be told. And that's also why I'm super happy to be invited to this panel, because we've seen some really good results there when it comes to biodiversity. Not one species have been lost due to forestry and forest management in Sweden so far. And I'm really determined that it should not be one single species that have been lost because of forestry. Due to climate change might be, but not forestry. And I'm going to fight against climate change as well. But it's super important to have in mind. And also one more misconception that I think when I often hear talking about forest management on EU level is the idea that forest is being grown and then chopped down only to become bioenergy, that we chop it into pieces and burn it. That is not the case. It is the timber that is the valuable product. No forest owner is growing or harvesting their forest to use it as biofuels or a bioenergy to being burnt. That is the last resort. That is what you do with the branches, what you do with the spillovers. Trees are round, timber is squares. That means you get a lot of restovers. That's what being burnt. That is the residues from the forestry industry and from the sawmill industry. That is what we can use for bioenergy. And that's amazing that we can do that. Because I'm from industry, and when I was engineer, my first summer at the combined heat and power plant, we fired coal, and it was coal that we burned, and now it's residues from the sawmills, and that is an amazing story that we need to be better at telling.
Great, thank you very much. And sorry, I'm just very conscious of time there. Thank you very much for that. Very covered all of the points there from the first and second panel. So thank you. Great. We're really up against it with the time. So what I'm going to do is to thank our panelists very much there for their interventions and for Mr. Houseman for his presentation at the start. I'll do a quick catch up. While I'm doing that, just to remind the audience, please remember to submit any Q&A that you have for this panel or the next one using the Q&A function. These panelists will be back at the end and we will be there to take your questions if we have any time left. So please do continue to submit via the Q&A button. So we're going to wrap up the first panel now. That was tremendous. We covered an awful lot of ground, quite a lot of common themes, and also building on what we heard from the co-chair's introduction at the start. So I think the themes that I'm going to take the Mr. Houseman's opening phrase, which is a simple question with a complex answer. And I think all of the answers then really fed into that. And I think also this jigsaw analogy was very helpful. A number of other people drew on it, that it's a jigsaw and one size doesn't fit all. So that was a very common theme that came through. We heard the word integrated come through a lot, and diversity. So a range of objectives, a wide range of forest types, and whatever Europe does, it needs to be able to address that diversity of approaches, both the geographies and also the politics of the countries where it's involved. When we heard from Mr. Banzer, he talked about this integrated approach, balanced approach with sustainable forest management, and this diversity of forests again came up, and the question of subsidiarity. Mr. Kamvitz brought in the interest of balancing not just between objectives, but also between the short term and the long term, and making sure that what we do in the short term is complementing what we need to do in the long term, and reminded us of the particular importance for resilience of things like skills and the importance of engaging with smaller scale forest owners and farmers. The second point he made, which was about concerning what Europe does beyond the European boundaries and the impacts of other policies more widely globally. And then we heard from Ms. Wiesner, who did a wonderful summary of all of the issues, I think, but she was passionate in her plea for a forest owner-centric approach, particularly in terms of that question of building in social cohesion, recognising diversity, and then echoing the themes of the co-chairs and others, this shift from a fossil to a bio-based economy. This has been raised by a number of different people, and I think we're going to hear a bit more about that, but that was coming through very clearly at the end from Ms. Wiesner, so thank you for that. So thanks very much all. That's captured hopefully the summary of the first panel. What we're going to do now is, if the first panel can switch their cameras off and say thank you, we will see you back in about half an hour. And we're now going to move on to the second panel. And this panel is going to be addressing forests for climate and nature. And to kick us off, I'd like to introduce Professor Tudor Stancioiu, sorry, I knew I'd get that wrong, Stancioiu, from the Faculty of Silviculture and Forest Engineering in the University of Brasov. And after Tudor has spoken, I will introduce you to the rest of the panel. So over to you, Tudor.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll start sharing my screen now. Okay. So thank you very much for the introduction and for inviting me to this event. Esteemed members of the European Parliament, of the Commission and of ministries, and dear participants, it is my pleasure to bring to your attention in the next minutes some aspects about our forests, which I hope will bring a fruitful discussion afterwards. So, what do we want and need from EU Forest? You may find this title a little bit intriguing, as we should want only what we need. But I think it's a good one, because sometimes it seems, at least sometimes, we are asking for something that might bring a different result, and not what we need. So I think these kind of discussions are very good and welcome. So what do we want from you first? Well, we want many different products, services, and values, but in a very complex context. We have a high diversity of forest types, high diversity of ownership, high diversity of management goals and management practices. So to have a pragmatic and successful EU forest-related decision-making, I think we need to understand really well our forests in this very complex and challenging context. Understanding means that we should really understand why we have what we have. So start learning from mistake, yeah, that's true, but also learning from the success stories. And I think we should take into account 3 necessary steps: a very large scale approach, a long-term perspective, and the fact that our forests are dynamic. So what do all these imply? Well, the very large scale approach is the only chance to reach a significant effect at EU level or global level. It is also the only chance to accommodate for conflicting values in the same time. I'll talk a little bit later about that. The long-term perspective is also mandatory because forests are not produced or restored overnight. They are very long-living organisms. And yes, even if we cannot predict or control 100% their dynamics, we should at least accept that they are dynamic and address that, not ignore that. So what are the implications? Well, again, the large-scale approach is mandatory to accommodate for conflicting values like timber versus recreation, close to nature versus aesthetics, things that cannot be maximized in the same place in the same time. So we need much more places, a much larger area, and therefore we will be relying on the managed forested landscapes, the nature with humans, an important thing to realize. You may wonder why close to nature is not the same thing with aesthetics. Well, it's not always the same thing with aesthetics because it is close to what nature does, not to what would please us. Okay, so as we can see in this picture, we have many different things done by nature by its natural disturbances, which are quite similar in terms of outcome to many of our forestry interventions. So it is doing something similar and obtaining something similar. Okay. Not necessarily something aesthetically pleasing. It's true. So why is such a big challenge? Well, we never tried to replicate, and I don't think we will, to replicate very high intensity and very large scale disturbances. But it seems that nowadays we are moving to an extreme, considering that close to nature means no disturbance at all or very low impact disturbance. Even some larger gaps like those produced under the shelterwood system are considered far from nature, ignoring many of the structures from the left, which are produced by many common disturbances we have in Europe and we had in the past, like wildfires in some parts, insects and wind in other parts. So we are facing a challenge somehow to stay close to nature indeed, or move close to emotions. Now, of course, the public tends for close to emotions, but biodiversity and any other values that we seek are dependent on close to nature. So we should stay focused and more pragmatic, I think. So what if the forests are changing in time? Well, first of all, we must accept that because many people don't believe that. So they are changing in time with or without us. And that means that biodiversity and all the other values are changing in time in the same place. So still, how to have all of them and always? Well, we need a very large and very diverse landscape, a mosaic that has all the structures in the same time. This is the so-called shifting steady state mosaic, which harbors all of them. Okay? So again, we will need the very large landscapes which are under management, the nature with humans. I will spend just a little bit time here to talk about old forest and old growth forest because lately it looks like a story of good intentions which might end up with wrong results. We are facing a myth that only the old forest or only the old growth forest has it all the values, and the rest, no. Well, the truth is that each stage provides habitat to certain species, and none of them has all. So again, the key is the mosaic, and the old forest is just one component. It is important, yeah, but just one component. So how to produce or have that? By strict protection or wise management? And I think this is an important question because we see many people nowadays comparing the short rotation intensive plantations with some more natural forests which are managed for a long rotation. And of course, emotionally based decision is that such old forests managed for a long rotation are automatically old growth. Old growth phase starts when the trees are dying because of age, when they reach their senescence. And for the most common species of Europe, spruce or fir or oaks or European beech, that is way over 200-300 years of age. So what would happen if we will misinterpret the managed forest for a long rotation as being old growth and place them under strict protection? Well, it means that for the rest of the landscape, the rotation age will be lowered, which means that we will prevent the chance for such forests to occur in the future in the landscape. Plus that those that are placed under strict protection will change in time as well because of natural disturbances. So overall, it reduces the chance for such forests. Okay, it is penalizing those that obtain them by a long rotation, and definitely it will scare away any others that might embrace a long rotation concept. So while protecting the true old growth forests, which are several hundred years old and are not obtained by management, is normal, the protection of the managed forests, which are misinterpreted as old growth, will bring less. The story of strict protection, nature with us or nature without us. What is the difference? Because many times people claim that strict protection is good, but don't ask what is the outcome. Well, with us, it means control over the change or management of change, and it means humans with nature, something that is natural in Europe. We have been here for several millennia. What means without us? It means no control over the change, and it means humans expelled from nature, something that is not natural in Europe. And it's not always a nice looking scenery, and definitely will not remain unchanged. So what to do? Do something or do nothing? Well, it depends what we want from our forest, indeed. Doing something means control over change or producing the change to obtain all the values and services we need. And also gives us the chance to have the large landscape approach, to have an impact at EU level. Doing nothing means no control over the change. So we might not have all the values all the times. It will never cover large, significant and connected areas in Europe to have a significant impact, and could lead to even more frequent and more intense disturbances. So overall might provide less, even in terms of biodiversity. So what shall we do? Well, a combination of both is probably better, and we have that, but the proportion of each becomes important, especially at present when we talk about expanding strict protected land. Now, what would that mean? Well, that would shift the burden on the rest of the area. All the values will be shifted on the rest of the area, and that might not be a wise solution. So we should ask ourselves, why increase strict protected land? To learn more from nature or to conserve more? If it is to conserve more, it seems that wise management is much better and more viable. If it is to learn more, we should ask ourselves if we need more area to learn more, or we can learn from what we have already. So these kind of questions, I think they should be asked and answered before decision making. On top of everything now, we are facing the climate challenge, which is probably the greatest challenge, because it's not only speeding up the change, but it's also driving the change in directions we cannot predict. It also asks for very different measures, very different efforts for mitigation under the umbrella of climate smart forestry, which we don't even know yet if it will always be close to nature, for example. So how to deal with this very complex context and dynamic? I think we should have two approaches, a global one and a local one. The global approach means that for a coherent and connected network of forests of a certain kind of certain status at the European level, well, we must make similar efforts at state level. And at local level, each member state should assess the status and identify the necessary steps to achieve the goals, and then make the efforts, which might mean more in some places and less in others. Some final messages. I think it's time of action more than ever, rather than doing nothing. It is difficult to take decisions because the context is very complex and dynamic in the same time, but that requires sound science and all the gathered experience. So we should be pragmatic and not base our decisions on emotions. And to be successful, we must involve the true stewards of the land, which are the owners and the managers. Plus, I think we should put all our efforts on doing the right thing and not on doing nothing and paying a lot. I think doing nothing at this moment is not the right thing. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Am I back on? Yes. Great. Thank you very much for that, Tudor. That was excellent and really comprehensive coverage there. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is just to introduce you to our next panel. So if I could ask the members of panel 2 to switch on their cameras, and when I say your name, if you could just give a wee wave to the audience so that they know who you are. Okay, so first of all, we have Marius Vastega, who I think who is head of cabinet of the Commissioner of Environment, Oceans and Fisheries.
Hello, good afternoon.
Thank you. Hello, nice to meet you. We then have Jose Pogorjek, I hope I've pronounced that okay, who is the Slovenian Minister of Agriculture, Forestry and Food.
Hello, hello.
Hello, great. Then we have Anton Haresh, who is here in support of Mr. Pogorjek, who's the State Secretary, Slovenian Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Food.
Good afternoon.
Hello. We re-welcome MEP Elsi Katainen, who we saw at the start. Welcome back, Elsi. And we're also, Mr. Stancioiu is also joining our, sorry, Professor Stancioiu is also joining this panel. So welcome all. So we're going to kick off with the opening question, which is similar to the first one. In your opinion, what are the most important things, two most important things that can be achieved through the Green Deal to ensure that Europe's forests play their full part in addressing climate change and reversing biodiversity decline? Now, because I know you're pressed for time, I'm going to go to Mr. Pogorjek first to answer that one, please.
Thank you, dear members of the European Parliament, dear organizers, dear Commissioner, dear panelists, dear guests. I wish to first thanks for organizing this event and for the opportunity to speak with you one day before we start of the Slovenian presidency of Council of European Council. Forests, due to their ecological and socio-economic function, occupy an important role in fights against climate change and decreasing biological diversity, and in transition to the climate neutral and circular economy. Do you hear me? Oh, okay, okay. Forests have an important role in keeping our rural areas alive and ensuring their development, as income from forests is important for most of them. At the same time, forests are under pressure from climate change and natural disturbances, such as forest fires, ice sleet, winds, pests and diseases outbreaks, affecting the long-term capacity of the forest to deliver now and in the future the many services they provide. To use the full potential of forests, we thus need a balance among all forest functions, directed towards sustainable, multifunctional, and close to nature forest management. Increase the vitality and resilience of forests and promote efficient forest resources management and biodiversity protection, whilst recognizing national characteristics, limitations, and capabilities. Thus, it is necessary that the European Green Deal recognize all three important pillars: economic, social, and environmental, and to reflect them in the upcoming EU forest strategy, enabling a holistic framework while addressing the ever-increasing fragmentation of the sectorial approaches to forests. Only in such a way, forests will be able to contribute to achieving the EU ambitious goals in the areas of climate, biodiversity, rural development, energy, and environment. Thank you for now.
Thank you very much. Okay, I would like to go to Maris Vazchega next, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And once again, good afternoon. I think if to be very brief, I could say, you know, that the two things which we could achieve for our forests in through the European Green Deal, and of course through various initiatives that we are preparing currently under the European Green Deal, is number one would be to enhance the resilience of forests. And number two, it would be to integrate, you know, to integrate the policies which are relevant to the forest, because many speakers have mentioned how many other policies are so relevant for the forest. So the idea would be to integrate them in a comprehensive strategy, you know, where we would be able to ensure that forests are addressed in a consistent manner across the different policies. So this is a very brief answer, but you know, to give a little bit more, and especially on the resilience, I think you know, society expects and demands more and more from our forests, and I hear very well the speakers who are saying that forests are often a private asset, and you know, and they are managed by the private owners, and of course the Commission is working with them. But I think the society at large, they also realize that forests have an essential role for common good. And that is why actually the public and political scrutiny on the state and management of our forests is increasing enormously. And that's why there is a certain pressure which is coming on us as decision makers to deliver on that public interest. And citizens, in fact, are aware that the conservation status of protected forest habitats in especially in some of the EU member states, not in all, we have very good examples, but we also have not excellent examples, so examples where we could make things better. So the conservation status is unfavorable, that there are issues with intense logging, which has a negative impact on protected forest habitats and on species depending on forests. There are also instances where, you know, forests are degrading. So, you know, there are biodiversity issues, but there are also climate change impacts, which are also increasing. And many speakers, you know, have already mentioned the pests. They have mentioned storms, droughts, forest fires. I will not be going deeply into that, but just to mention and to try to put it in the big picture. You know, the expectation is, and the understanding and the feeling in the society that our forests are not doing well right at the moment, when we need them most to help us to combat biodiversity loss and the climate change, which are the two planetary crises. And that's why we have a shared responsibilities to step up the efforts and to really act. And when I was listening to the presentation of Professor, I was really interested, you know, because he was putting it from so many different directions. But at the end, his conclusion was that it is a time to act as well. That was my understanding. So, indeed, at the current moment, we are preparing the land use and land use change regulation, which is to come out soon, and that is, of course, about how we can increase the role of forests.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but do you think we could bring that to an end? Sure. Otherwise, we're not going to get through the rest of the panel.
I'm just finishing up that we are preparing the land use and land use change regulation. We are also preparing the Renewables Energy Directive, which is connected to the use of forest biomass and also the forest strategy. So with these, I think we can really address the resilience and also the multifunctionality and you know, to various things that various functions that forests have to make in policy documents.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll now go to Elsi Katainen.
Yes, thank you, Joe. In my opinion, the best way to ensure that forests play the full part is to remember that their role is not constricted to addressing climate change and reversing biodiversity decline. if one pillar of sustainability collapses, the rest come down as well. Finally, we should remember that Green Deal is supposed to be a growth strategy. So far, we haven't concentrated much on growth, and I hope Commission will correct the approach here. Don't get me wrong, the forests keep on growing, but that's probably not what was meant when the Green Deal was launched as a growth strategy. It means economic growth and balance in all pillars of sustainability agreed by United Nations. And here I mean social, economical and environmental dimension. Also, while implementing in the future the legislation on Green Deal, the best result will be done when member states are committed for the implementation and all of us are involved equally, that not only some member states does more and some less. We have many other important biodiversity than just forests. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Harris, do you want to add anything as well as your minister? Do you want to say something here or? No? Okay. In that case, I will come to you, Mr. Stancioiu. What two things would you suggest can be achieved with the Green Deal?
Thank you. Well, if forests are considered an effective tool, then yes, the area of forest should increase, but that should be also based on sound analysis. As the Green Deal is not only about climate mitigation and biodiversity, it's also about sustainable and inclusive growth. So yes, afforestation, if it is good, we should do it where it is needed, but without affecting biodiversity or economical, social viability of local communities or economies. That would be the first. And the second, which is probably the most important in my point of view, is to continue sustainable close to nature management in the areas where it is in place and embrace sustainable close to nature management in the rest. But hopefully that would be by rewarding the actors which are already doing it and supporting those that need to change their management. So it not only by imposing, but also by rewarding and supporting. I think I really would like to underline the importance of this rewarding, even if some countries or some owners would do it not being constrained by the Green Deal or by the EU legislation. They might do it by the national legislation. And of course, it would be great that the definition of sustainable forest management and close to nature to be pragmatic, based on science and gathered experience, not on emotions.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. So I'm going to come to individual questions now that I have for you. And Mr. Podkorjek, I'm going to come to you first because I understand you need to leave. So as Slovenia takes over presidency of the EU Council, what are your priorities for Europe's forests and forestry to ensure that their potential for the climate and biodiversity is fulfilled whilst maintaining their economic viability?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I would like to say that I completely agree with Mr. Tudor. We have to manage with forest, of course, on a sustainable way, but we have to manage with them. We believe forestry should be addressed in a holistic way, recognizing national specifics and capacities, and that the objectives of various EU policies can be achieved within national competencies. National competences are really important. Countries are aware of the situation and promote carbon sink in wooden products, substitution of fossil materials and fuels. They also recognize biodiversity protection, green jobs, and rural development, where wood is an important source of income for farmers and forest owners. This is why Slovenia also included forestry among its priorities to promote sustainable forest management, multifunctionality, development of rural areas, and also address the issues of illegal logging and deforestation. Multifunctionality is an essential concept in achieving this, for which we believe should be, together with sustainable forest management, a key principle as it clarifies that on any given single area of multi-functionality managed forest, several management objectives can be defined at the same time, including the climate and biodiversity. It is also important to consider prevention measures, reducing the magnitude of natural disasters and pests overpopulation, and thus have a positive impact on the resilience and vitality of forest ecosystems, to keep the forest sync and as a habitat for species. Yes. During our presidency, we will aim that all three aspects will be fully and holistically reflected. So, as you know, I have to go because I have other work. Mr. Hare will stay with you, and they will answer to edit questions. So thank you thank you for organizing it, and please apologize me because I have to really go immediately.
Of course, I
Bye-bye.
understand. Thank you very much for joining us. It was really helpful. Okay, so my next question, I'm going to go to Ms. Katainen. I've got quite a long question for you, so but hopefully it's a relatively straightforward answer. Okay, so last autumn, the European Parliament adopted an initiative report on the future EU forest strategy, calling for a balanced approach among all forest benefits, including biodiversity. On the 9th of June, the European Parliament voted on its report on a biodiversity strategy to 2030, in which forests received prominent attention. How would you say that these two reports present a consistent picture of the roles of forests in the EU Green Deal? And what else needs to be done to ensure that the EU forest strategy is in line with the Parliament's views?
Thank you for a good question. The report on EU forest strategy is a report that gives a comprehensive view on what EP wants the Commission to do with forests. Unfortunately, the recent leaked forest strategy draft seemed to imply that the Commission has not taken Parliament's requests into account, or either the European Council's conclusions on the EU forest strategy. Fortunately, there is still time to make the needed changes and present the balanced strategy to us. We all agree that the biodiversity needs to be enhanced, but the action how to reach it vary a lot. For forests, we have had in Finland for a long in practice sustainable forest management, and we have maybe the oldest forest law in the Europe, which states clearly that you need to take care of the forest, and if you harvest, you are obligated to plant new ones.
Thank you. Okay, so now coming to Mr. Vashchega. How would you say that current forest policy developments concretely consider the complementarity and balance between all forest policy developments and the balance between all ecosystem services that forests provide, including the production of wood that's so important for our climate and the protection and functions of forests, which are so necessary for our biodiversity?
Well, I think it's the multifunctionality of forests, which is in fact an answer to this question. It's the basic principle around which we are, in fact, building our new EU forest strategy. Current policies, they address both dimensions. Protection is the focus of the EU nature legislation, which, however, only covers certain forest habitats. Wood use is the focus of the bioeconomy strategy and related legislation, such as the Directive on Forest Reproductive Material. So the new forest strategy will reinforce this balance and create synergies between the two dimensions. And in the end, you know, the healthier forests are good for climate, for biodiversity, but also for the economy. And we also need to boost revenues from non-timber forest resources as well. And to really reinforce this multifunctionality, in fact, my Commissioner Sienkiewicz, also works on the forest strategy hand in hand with Commissioner Wojciechowski. And we are looking for win-win solutions, enhancing biodiversity, we can enhance all forest functions and their resilience and adaptation, climate mitigation, functions related to bioeconomy and so on. I think with this, the forest strategy will overcome various challenges and unlock the potential of forest for our future.
Okay, thank you. There might be some questions on that one later, so brace yourself. Okay. Next, the last question with the panel then is for you, Professor, which is the role of sustainable and multifunctional forests in climate and biodiversity well reflected in the EU Green Deal policy objectives and expectations?
Okay, well,
so, sorry, and then there's a second part to it, which is with your scientific background, can you share some comments on whether the best strategy for EU forests to contribute to Green Deal objectives is through non-intervention or through active management and adaptation? I think you probably answered that in your presentation, but maybe you could just cover it very briefly again. Thanks.
Okay, so for the first question, I think generally, yes, they are covered, as the Green Deal is considered to be an opportunity to put Europe firmly on a new path of sustainable and inclusive growth. So this cannot be acquired without sustainable and multifunctional forests, but not only for climate and biodiversity, for many other services or goods. And also generally, I would say yes, because the transition must be just and inclusive. So it must put people first and pay attention to regions, industries, and workers who will face the greatest challenges. This is what is written. But in practice or in the future, I don't know, it's hard to properly assess now because we still have some terms which are not yet defined clearly and might change everything, like old growth, close to nature, strict protection, fair share. And also what my feeling is that many of the documents start with the picture at the global level, which is not wrong, but is incomplete because I haven't seen a very clear image of what is the status in Europe, why we have what we have, and to start, I mean, in order to be able to have effective measures to address the main drivers of biodiversity loss, we should focus on our problems definitely, and should see, as other presenters said, which are the species that are facing, I don't know, extinction or whatever else, or ecosystems in Europe, and see those first. So I hope the role of sustainable and multifunctional forest in climate mitigation, biodiversity conservation, social and economic welfare will be properly reflected in practice, but I think is a long way.
Thank you very much.
For the second one, I would say that definitely climate mitigation and all the other ambitions need a very large scale approach. And as I mentioned during my presentation, I believe the only chance is to take into account the managed forested landscapes. So I believe it is time for action more than ever. So to solve the problems, we need to change or adapt the management in some places, not to stop management. Strict protection would cost very much, while instead of solving problems, might even worsen the situation by shifting the burden on other lands. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so thank you everybody for that. So we covered a lot of ground in that panel. Excuse me while I refer to my notes because I've been scribbling frantically. So so what do we have first? I think the question that you put to us, Professor, about I thought was interesting, is another tension, which is between what we want and what we need, and the two sometimes are in conflict with each other. And you brought up the example there of do natural processes actually give us what we want? Similar to the intervention in the first panel, you referred to mosaic, which jigsaw mosaic, similar kind of ideas here, this kind of patchwork happening. And then you gave us the question, you drilled the question down to, basically it comes down to, do we do something or do we do nothing? And you advocated that we should be doing something because change is going to happen anyway. If we don't do anything, change is going to happen. and that it's all about how much we want to control it. But you recognise the science isn't perfect. We need to use pragmatism in there, but also we do need to get better information, and we should emotion this. And I think you said keep the emotion out of it. I might push you a bit on that. I think emotions can be quite helpful, but I think the pragmatism comes in there. Then we heard from Minister Bogorczyk, and who made the plea, as others have done, about forest owners, and about long-term capacity, again, needing the balance. And as many others have done, this question of the three pillars, if you knock away one of the three pillars of sustainability, or three legs of the stool falls over. You need all three: the social, economic and environmental. We then heard from Mr. Wojciega, who focused on enhancing resilience, and that balance between society's needs, the public good, and the needs of the forest owners, and also the need to integrate between relevant policies, and his confidence that this is going to happen through the forestry strategy, the land use strategy, and building on what's there with the biodiversity strategy. We then heard from Ms. Katainen, who emphasised again the need for the three pillars. She also reminded us that the Green Deal is actually a growth strategy, and where's the growth in all of this? And maybe we need to keep our eye on that one. Question of subsidiarity again came up, and the need to involve all member states. This burden can't all fall on one. We came back to Mr. Stancioiu, who said about the sound analysis, and the point that I keep coming across in my work is definitions, and understanding what words mean, but also recognizing that those words might change in meaning over time and through translation, and particularly words like old growth and close to nature management. What on earth do those mean in different circumstances? And we need to be really alive to that. Okay, then we came back to Minister Bogorczyk about the Slovenian priorities, and he talked about the national competencies again, this fossil and bio substitution as importance, the importance of sustainable forest management and multifunctionality as the underpinning principles for forestry policy, and again that word resilience that keeps coming up through all of this. Coming back to Ms. Katainen, concerns about the leaked draft of the strategy did not seem to have taken these points into account. Then Mr. Wojciega, again, multifunctionality. Everybody's saying multifunctionality. I think, though, that that's possibly one of these words where definitions come into play. My version of multifunctionality might be different from somebody else's, and it's always worth checking in on that. And then finally, from the professor, yes, the Green Deal does recognise these needs, but again, that importance of definitions and the focus of what we need to do rather than stepping back and doing nothing. Okay, so that was a very quick canter. Thank you all for your contributions on that. What we're going to do now is to move to the Q&A session, and on my other screen, I have the questions coming in from the audience. So if the other panel members could all now switch their cameras on, and some of these are specific and some of them are general, so you may need to raise your hand if you want to ask them. Okay, so if everybody could switch their cameras on. And the first question is coming to Mr. Wojciega. And the question is, has the Commission made sufficient socio-economic impact assessment ahead of proposing its objectives and targets for forests?
Thank you for the question. Well, first of all, I think we have to understand what the Commission is trying to do now on various strands of work, which I already mentioned. One is the LULUCF, where we speaking about carbon sinks, which is a legislative proposal. So it's a law, it's a legislation, and there, of course, you know, all the necessary impact assessments have been produced. The same goes as for any other legislation. For the strategies, they are based on the sound science. They are based on our own in-house, you know, scientific joint research center, which by the way produced very valuable analysis on the forests, as on many other things as well. But when and if we come to the legislation, and I think this is where, by the way, there is a little bit of a misunderstanding constantly with the forest strategy, that it is a strategy. It is not a piece of legislation. We are trying to set the the road, the compass, where we want to go, what we want to achieve. And if that will require in the road to it, it will require legislation. Of course, the even more thorough impact assessment will be done. For the moment, already we are relying on our own GRC studies, but on plenty of other science.
Thank you very much. Okay, the next question, that's a general one, so please put your hand up if you want to answer it. If not, I might just pounce on one of you. So the question is, don't the panelists see a risk that, as in the past, the strategy will remain, in quotes, soft law, but forestry will be regulated by more binding initiatives, such as the Renewable Energy Directive revision, the Sustainable Finance Initiative and its taxonomy, the forthcoming revision of LULUCF, as you just referred to, but also new initiatives in the field of carbon removal and carbon farming, not to mention the Deforestation-Free Supply Chains Initiative and the Biodiversity Policy. So the question is, you have the strategy that's soft, as I suppose, as you just said, it's the compass, to continue the analogy, but the map and the directions is going to come from the other sides. So is that a risk? And I'm going to add to that, and what do you think would be the best mitigation for it? Who would like to have a go at that? Go for it. Yeah.
I don't want to monopolize the microphone, but maybe just a couple of words. You know that, in fact, I think everything is necessary. The legislation is necessary when we are ripe for legislation, and the softer measures are necessary when we need to set the direction. You know, everyone is now speaking about the European Green Deal, but if we think about it, the European Green Deal is not a law. European Green Deal is a Commission communication. It's our strategic compass. It's our route to go, which has been endorsed by many players, and this is how now it is being implemented and finding its way into various, sometimes laws, sometimes strategies, and so on. So I think all these things, they have their own role to play, and even the discussion which I'm seeing today and now, you know, with various approaches, with various ideas, I think it's just a very good confirmation that, in fact, to have a forest strategy and not a law or something at this particular moment is exactly the right approach.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Stanciolo, you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, well, I think there is a risk. Of course, it's not that the strategy should do it all, but it depends how we define soft. If it's only soft, maybe it's nothing wrong. But again, if it is how the states or how the Commission will understand certain terms from the strategy and then transpose them into legislation. So I'm not saying it is to blame it all on the strategy, but there is a risk that certain things will be transposed later in terms that would bring just more restrictions, as probably the person that asked the question was fearing, without being necessary the good things for multi-purpose sustainable forest management in acquiring the goals of the Green Deal. So we should be very careful with that. And even if it's a soft law, I think it is room maybe to clearly state some things. What do they mean in the view of the strategy, at least?
Thank you. Okay, does anybody else want to speak on that one, or shall I move on to the next question? Yes, Ms. Katainen.
Thank you. I do agree with the questionnaire, and I see the risk that some kind of soft law is coming. Of course, the legislation is, of course, necessary when we stay in the framework of EU treaty, but this is also the thing that we have strategies for the topics which are not directly for the competences of EU's competencies. Good strategy can be sometimes better than bad legislation, but I see the risk.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, I don't see anybody else wanting to answer on that. So, so the next question then is on this question of definitions. So EU forests are multifunctional. Indeed, the value of water purification, for example, is 4 times the value of timber provision, according to, and then there's a massive HTML link that I aren't going to read out. So what is your idea? Do one of you want to have a go at just saying what your idea of multifunctionality is? How do you define multifunctionality? Anybody? Yeah. I know you want to come in, Tudor. I'm just going to see if anybody else. Mr. Houseman, were you indicating there, or do you want to have a go at that? You'll need to unmute.
So first of all, I apologize for the technical problem I had. The only apologize is that we are in Germany still suffering from yesterday's football match against England. So that's maybe the only apologize I can offer to you. So indeed, Forest Europe has defined multifunctionality in the way that it's defined the sustainable forest management. And as I tried to explain, these are the 3 pillars which have been mentioned now several times: the economical, the social, and the ecological part of the forest. And I'm not bothering you now with a long definition, but what is important is that multifunctionality is not a static concept. It's a concept which is dynamic. And I think the societal demands also needs communication. It needs also a dialogue to explain that foresters, the forest owners are doing. And I think Mrs. Wiesner was quite correct explaining these importance. So that's maybe more a direct answer and avoiding to read out the definition of Forests Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Wiesner, do you want to come in?
Yes, please. When I think about multifunctionality, I mean, that is what the forests are already giving us, that we can use forest and forest biomass to many different and various applications. We use forest for timber, we use it for pulp and paper to produce paper products, replacing plastics. We can use wood fibers for doing new types of textiles, plastic products, bioplastics. There are many trials in Sweden right now, pilot facilities for producing aviation fuel based on residues from the paper industry. I mean, it is a multifunctional product and a multifunctional industry. However, and I really like that, and that's also what normally referred to as the cascading effect. You have high value products and then you use residues for low value products. And this is sometimes the misconception that I hear often, getting questions about Swedish forestry. Is it true that you're chopping down trees, cutting them into pieces and burn them? Well, we burn the residues, replacing fossil energy in the heat systems that we have, but no trees are being grown only to become chopped down and burnt. That is the residues, and it's simply because it's market logic, the business case. You get more value out of making timber, but in order to grow that timber, first of all, you need the tree, and the tree is round. The timber, the log that is needed is often then a square piece, but also you need to help the forest growing by managing it. Look at it like now in the gardens in summertime, you're growing strawberries. You have to remove some of the smaller plants in order to make room for the big ones. All of us know that, and we knew that since we were kids. But sometimes talking about forests, people talk about forests as it would be something different. But of course you need to manage forests to make them as efficient and fast growing and healthy as possible. You also need to remove residues out from the forest. So smaller trees are being removed in order to make the forest more healthy. And those are residues from forestry and cannot often be used for timber and often cannot even be used for paper because the quality of these small trees it's too bad. And what should we do with them then? Either you do nothing, or we see that we have fossil energy in an energy sector that we need to replace. and that is then used for being bioenergy. And I think that's really good, and that is multifunctional, and that is a cascading principle. But as a politician, we should be very, very careful to steer the market, saying what should do what. I mean, this is run by market. We get new products every day, new, more exciting innovations are coming. We as politicians cannot plan the economy and look into our crystal ball and know for what trees should be used for what. So the forest is multifunctional, but we should be very, very careful in regulating that multifunctional possibilities that forests have on EU level, especially on EU level, at political level as in general, I would say.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Harry, you haven't had a chance to speak. Did I see you put your hand up? Would you like to come in there? Because this is going to be the final intervention, so go for it if you want to.
Thank you very much for the word. Yes, we think that that the participatory approach is very important. It's not the experts who defined the forest functions, but the society. Experts just give it into the legislation. With the legislation define how these functions are promoted, sustainable and close to nature. If in the past was wood for economy, or maybe now more for the recreation, now we will talk about for the thing. So these expectations always is changing, and we think that the society is who define the priorities of the using of the forest. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, thanks all for your contributions there. I mean, this could have taken up a day, this topic, or a week even. It reaches so far. So we've only really scratched the surface, but I think we've had a really rich conversation, and it's been fascinating and a real privilege to be able to chair it. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to welcome and hand over to MEP Carmen Avram, who's a member of the European Parliament, to give us some closing remarks. Over to you, Carmen.
Thank you, Joe, for the floor. And you are right. What a fascinating meeting this was. It's been a year now since the finalization of the negotiations on the European Parliament's position on the EU forest strategy, where I was a shadow on behalf of SD, and I was so happy to have had the chance to come back to a topic of high interest for me. I'd like to take a minute to congratulate the EP Intergroup on Climate Change, Biodiversity and Sustainable Development for running this webinar. Many thanks to Elsi and Simone for having me and giving me the opportunity to wrap up this debate. And thanks to our panelists today for their exceptional contributions. While listening to the discussions, I imagined what if we would put together all the forested area in the European Union and look from the outer space. We would have a breathtaking image. Almost half of our union is forested. But as much as probably not only me would like to have this once in a lifetime opportunity to take such a picture, I know it is impossible because all these forested areas are spread all around the union, and they are different colors, different sizes, different ownership, different structures, and most importantly, different functionalities. So I think the only possible angle to look at our forests is different angles, just like our forests are different, a mosaic, to use Mr. Sancho's term during his wonderful presentation, because a one-size-fits-all approach is as unrealistic as one-size-fits-all picture from outer space. The draft of the European Commission is preparing on the EU forest strategy a lot of vital points, and I am glad to see their ideas. I have been negotiating for 1 year, like for many months a year ago, sustainable forest management, zero tolerance for illegal logging, and illegal logging being a very, very sensitive issue in Romania. An agroforestry dimension, extremely important, as Mr. Kaimovic outlined, and unfortunately not explored at its full capacity. Primary and old growth forest visions and optimal utilization of the wood in a cascading logic, the importance of wood as a carbon storage construction material, the vital importance of wood for rural mountainous regions, and the list may go on. But I believe what is extremely important right now is to adjust the angle to take the picture of all these points in order to have a truly sustainable EU forest strategy that fits all EU forests, as Mr. Podgorczak outlined, respects the subsidiarity principle and the competence of member states, as both Elsi and Simone outlined in their opening remarks, and most importantly, a strategy which does not overwhelm forest owners and member states with even more bureaucracy. Let us not forget one key message Mr. Banza mentioned today, namely that even for the Institute for Nature Conservation and Forests in Portugal and for their experts, the cascade of new developments, strategies, and upcoming regulatory packages, among which let us not forget the taxonomy, from one day to the other seem to be overwhelming. What about the national, regional, and local authorities, which will have to integrate these words into legislation and to follow it successfully? And Emma stressed this in her speech as well. This is why in the European Parliament's mandate, there are very clear positions on the shared competencies on forests, on the multifunctionality of forests that you're just talking about, and on the synergies between forestry and other interconnected sectors, like the agricultural one, the construction one, the energy one, and many others which have to be respected by the European Commission. And this is the angle we should look at forests. And now, in order to make my point clear, I'd like to refer just for a minute to one particular aspect of the EU forest strategy, the primary and old growth forests. Romania is an one-of-a-kind example. Apart from Scandinavia, Romania has the biggest EU share of primary and old growth forests. Declaring them untouchable might not only lead to unfair competition within the European Union, but could also jeopardize other targets Romania, like any other member state, will have to achieve, like, for example, the 25% organic production. But in the primary and old growth forests, we allow sustainable activities such as agrotourism or the organic production. We respect and protect these forests, achieve their targets of the Green Deal, and reach the ultimate climate neutrality goal by 2050. We need not only to seek coherence between strategies, but also between sectors. And every sector is made up of people and their businesses. In the forestry sector, there are 3.5 million people directly or indirectly employed, and 16 million forest owners. Precisely these people will turn the green dream into the Green Deal. What they need is predictability, and yes, a framework, but a framework that accommodates all the specificities, as Mr. Hausmann indicated in his keynote. What we need to understand and act accordingly is that these people are diverse, and so are their businesses. Otherwise, we will not just keep on exporting carbon leakage outside the EU, but we will create an uncompetitive environment for the 450 million EU citizens. If we want forests to bring us one step closer to victory, we have to let them deliver, but hand in hand with us, to recall Mr. Stoncioiu's theory. And last but not least, since the EU forest strategy has already covered several EU presidencies, which have all contributed so far, I'd like to send my congratulations to Portugal and to wish Slovenia the best of luck in the upcoming 6 months. And thank you very much, and congratulations for this event.
Thank you very much. And thanks everyone for your contribution. Unfortunately, I didn't quite make 5:30, but we're nearly there. We're only going to go a couple of minutes over. So thank you very much for the hosting MEPs, for the participants, and to the speakers. just a reminder that the presentation, full list of participants, will be available on the intergroup website tomorrow. And could I also just thank the organisers? In 35 years in forestry, I have never sat on a panel that's had so many senior women sat around the table. And I just want to pass on to the organisers, thank you so much. It is so rare in forestry, and it's great to see you all, ladies. More power to your elbow. So thank you very much for that. Thanks all for this, and please promote the recording through the usual channels so that we get this important topic exposed to as many people as possible. Thank you very much for your time today, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.